Jehovah, addressing Job, uses the example of two great, magnificent creatures, the Behemoth and the Leviathan. Let's open up the Bible and think on these things. So we are at the end of the book of Job, and Yehovah is finally giving his own answer to Job and his three friends. And we are on chapter 40, and in this portion, Yehovah continues to speak. And we saw that in his first address, he asked Job a series of questions about his greatness. And Job had no answer to these questions. But he admitted that he had spoken far too much already. Yet though Job has nothing to say, Yehovah has much more to say. And first, he's going to appeal to his own divine power. And we're on Job chapter 40 and verse 6. And once again, I'm reading from E.W. Bullinger's metrical version of Job. Job 40 verse 6. Again, Jehovah said from out the storm. So again, Yehovah moves on to his second address, not out of a whirlwind like the King James Version has it, but out of the storm. And remember, a storm has been brewing, and Yehovah is speaking out of the storm. Now, verse 7. Now like a strong man gird up thou thy loins. 'Tis I who ask thee. Make thou me to know. So he calls upon him like a strong man. And that is the Hebrew geber, which means a strong man. A man of power or strength. A man mighty for warfare and so forth. He tells him to gird up his loins. Now we should realize at the time that men did not wear pants. They all wore robes. But when you were doing heavy labor, the robe could get in the way. So what they do is that you would reach down to the bottom of your robe, you'd pull it up from the back, and then you'd tie it up in front of you, and that would turn the robe kind of almost into a pair of shorts, and that would make it much easier to work. And workmen would typically do that. And so Yehovah calls on Job to gird up his loins, and that became a phrase to be ready for anything. To be ready to go to work. So he says, gird up your loins to be ready, because you've said you are going to argue against me and prove yourself right. So gird up your loins and be ready to answer me. He says, 'Tis I who ask thee, make thou me to know. So he says, Job, give me knowledge if you can. Give me knowledge, Jehovah. Give me knowledge if you can, Job. Verse 8, wilt thou indeed my judgment disannul? And me condemn, that thou mayest righteous seem? And remember, this is part of the reason that Elihu, the fourth friend, was so angry at Job, is that Job justified himself rather than justifying God. So Yehovah says to Job, go ahead, frustrate my judgment, condemn me, if you can. Verse 9, hast thou an arm then like the mighty God? Or canst thou thunder with a voice like his? So he asked him, do you have an arm like the mighty God? No, the arm, that was the symbol for strength. And even today, young men, when they're trying to show off their strength, will flex the muscles in their bare arms to show off their strength. So the arm, even in Old Testament times, is a symbol for strength. So he says, do you have strength like the mighty God? That's the singular, not the plural Elohim, but the singular El. And it's used for God in all his strength and power. Do you have an arm like God in all his power? Do you have that kind of power, Job? Then he says, or canst thou thunder with a voice like his? And remember, Yehovah was speaking out of a storm. And the storm was full of thunder. And he says, Yehovah can speak out of a storm, out of the thunder. Go ahead, do that, Job. Do that. Speak out of the thunder. Thunder with a voice like his. Verse 10, deck thyself now with glory and with might. Array thyself with majesty and power. So God says, Job, can you do what I can do? Can you deck yourself, array yourself, clothe yourself with things like majesty and excellency and glory and beauty? Can you do that, Job? Can you clothe yourself with majesty like Yehovah? Then verse 11, send far and wide thy overflowing wrath, and on each proud one look, and bring him low. So he says, Job, you think you're up to contending with God. Well, do this that God can do. Send out your wrath. Send it out to overflow when you're angry. And then look at each proud one and bring him low. Humble him. Go ahead, do it, Job. Humble all the proud. Because surely someone who's capable of arguing with God and winning and contending with him and winning, surely someone who could do that could do these things, could send out his overflowing wrath, could humble all the proud of the earth. And God will do that someday when his kingdom comes. He'll humble all the proud. Verse 12, each proud one single out and humble him. Yea, crush the evildoers where they stand. Of course, ironically, humbling a proud man is exactly what Yehovah is doing right now with Job. Job had thought he could argue with God and win. And Yehovah is humbling him. But he says, Job, single out the proud one and humble him. Do that. Surely you can do that if you can argue with God and win. And the evildoers, crush them where they stand. Yehovah can do that, and surely you can too if you can win in an argument with Yehovah. Now, God can do this, but notice that is not what he did with Job. We know that. This was Satan who was attacking Job. And it was at Satan's instigation, not God's. But surely God can and will crush the evildoers, and when his kingdom comes, all wickedness will be crushed at its source. So he says, go ahead and do that, Job, if you can argue with God and win. Verse 13, hide them away together in the dust, and in the deepest dungeon have them bound. So he says, hide them in it's not really dust, it's the topsoil. And of course, that's what we do with people when they're dead. We take them and we bury them in the topsoil. So he says, kill all the evildoers and hide them away in the topsoil as dead people. And in the deepest dungeons have them bound. And of course, when we talk about the very deepest dungeon, we're speaking metaphorically, we're talking about Sheol. That's the Hebrew word for the state of death. That's the very lowest of dungeons. You can't get lower than that. So he says, hide them in the state of death. So he says, do that to all the evildoers, Job. Do that to all of them. Now, a powerful man, a great king, might get rid of some of the evildoers in his land. He might be able to get rid of some of them. But only God can eliminate all evildoers by eliminating the flow of evil at its source. And of course, he will do that in the kingdom of God to come. But he says, Job, if you're capable of arguing with God and winning, surely you can do this too. Verse 14, then also I myself will own to thee, that thy right hand to save thee will suffice. He says, Job, if you can do these simple things I've asked you to do, well then I, Yehovah, will acknowledge, Job, you're right. Your own right hand, and remember the right hand in the Bible is the symbol of skill. He says, then I'll acknowledge that your own right hand will be sufficient to save you. If you can just do these simple things I just suggested. Well, again, he had thought he could argue with God and win and save himself by doing that. Well, Yehovah says, show me you can do these other things, and then I'll believe you can save yourself with your own skill. Well, that was Yehovah's first argument in his second address. But now he moves on to argue based on Behemoth and Leviathan. Verse 15, behold Behemoth now, which I have made as well as thee. Grass like the ox he eats. Now this Hebrew word behemoth is only here. This is the only time we read it in the Bible. Now behemoth is a plural of behema, which is a word often translated beast, the beast of the field, and so forth. But Strong suggests that in this case it's not actually the plural of behema, but it's actually a singular of Egyptian derivation. So this beast was known around Egypt. Now, some in modern days say that this behemoth is probably the hippopotamus. Bollinger suggests that in his companion Bible. Unfortunately, he had imbibed perhaps too deeply of the so-called science of his day, and that he had accepted the long ages, and the gap theory was what he believed. I don't agree with that. But others will say it's the elephant. They think it's the elephant. Well, I would suggest that either based on the description here, is absurd. Clearly, this behemoth is not a hippopotamus or an elephant. That's ridiculous. And it doesn't fit at all with the suggestion. Now, I think clearly what is being described here is what we would call a dinosaur, but that before the days of evolution was called a dragon. Strong suggests it could be the Diplodocus or the Brachiosaurus. Of course, they're always arguing about these things, and some of them change names, and they discover that they didn't really exist, or they were really a different dinosaur, or whatever. But at any rate, this is a great giant dinosaur, the very largest of them. From the description, I believe that this was the largest of the dinosaurs, and in fact, the largest of all the beasts of the field that the Lord made. Now, this beast was not a legend. It was known to live in Job's day, and Jehovah assumes that Job knows about it, that Job has seen these things, that he knows they exist. And of course, this shows the so-called evolutionary ages, where these things apparently went extinct millions of years ago, are a myth. And Jehovah testifies that he made Behemoth at the same time as he made Adam's race in the beginning. And remember, he made the beasts of the field. He made them on day 6 before he created Adam. And so indeed, not at the exact same time, but the same day, he would have made Behemoth and man, Adam's race. Now, this whole thing about the dragon versus the dinosaur. I believe that if we look at the history of cultures all over the world, they will all talk about dragons. They all knew dragons. The Chinese even incorporated it into their zodiac, along with 11 real non-mythological creatures. The 12th is the dragon. And everyone believed that the dragons were real. But, we human beings, we have an odd characteristic that when any creature goes extinct, we quickly stop believing in it. One story is that some of the early settlers or explorers from Europe coming to America and the East Indies, as they were called, because Columbus thought he reached the eastern part of India. Of course, he hadn't. But they landed on some of those islands, and they found there a giant flightless bird like the ostrich. This is very easy for them to shoot and get a large amount of meat from. And the European explorers quickly hunted these large birds to extinction. Well, when naturalists came back to these islands 150 or some years later, they found that the natives there believed that these birds were just a legend that their fathers had made up, because after all, I never saw one. And that's the strange thing about humanity. If we've never seen a creature, we think it's too fantastic to believe. Now consider some of the fantastic creatures in our experience. Have you ever studied some of the fantastic things that are true of different animals? Australia has animals that are nowhere else in the world. Very unique animals. And when the explorers to Australia brought back to England the examples, the skeletons of the duck-billed platypus, some English naturalists examined those and said, those are fakes. Such a creature couldn't possibly exist. Then explorers brought back live ones. But we always tend to think that fantastic creatures don't exist. Consider a creature with a nose like a vacuum cleaner that sucks up ants through its nose. That's incredible. Consider a creature with a neck like a tree, so it can eat the leaves off the top of trees. That's impossible. You can't make a heart strong enough to pump blood all the way up that neck. You can't do it. It's impossible. Giraffes couldn't possibly exist. Or even consider a creature as amazing as the dog. A creature smart enough to lead the blind, yet dumb enough to eat its own vomit. I mean, if we didn't have dogs all around us, we might think they're too fantastic to believe. And yet, let a creature go extinct, then give it 100 years or so, And people are saying, I don't believe that that creature could have ever existed. It's too fantastic. See, that's how silly and short-sighted and what a short memory we human beings have. So just let dragons go extinct, most of them anyway. I mean, the crocodile and alligator still survive. But let most of the dragons go extinct, and people stop believing in them. And then, of course, the most spectacular dragon that everyone talked about and is all the legends is the fire-breathing one. Consider, for example, if the bat would go extinct. Which bat do you think everybody would remember the most if bats were extinct? The fruit bat? No, the vampire bat, of course. That's the one everyone would remember. And then they'd read legends like Count Dracula, and they'd say, oh, that's ridiculous. Obviously, bats were just a myth, a legend. They couldn't possibly exist. You believe in Count Dracula? What an idiot. Well, see, that's what we do if bats went extinct. And so when dragons went extinct, everybody remembers the fire-breathing variety. Do you know there's a beetle that breathes fire? It's called the Bombardier beetle. Basically shoots a chemical mixture out its nostrils that ignites when the chemicals combine outside his body, and it becomes a fiery liquid chemical that burns its enemies. Basically shoots fire out of its mouth. Well, if a beetle can do it, why couldn't a lizard do it? And if a lizard could do it, why not a giant one? One as big as a crocodile or bigger. Why not? Why not? And yet they go extinct and people stop believing in them. Well, then along comes Darwin with his theory of evolution. And a lot of people in the 19th century are enthusiastic about evolution. Why? Well, because it's the first explanation, scientific explanation anyone's come up with for not believing in God, for not having to have a God. Before then, the only explanation for the world was a God. And it was also a great scientific explanation to justify racism. After all these races that are less than our race, the Europeans, of course, being the top of evolution, they thought, being Europeans, why all these other races are lower evolved. So we're justified in being prejudiced against them. And so a lot of enthusiastic atheists and racists went out excited because Darwin said, the way to prove my theory is the fossil record, to find the missing links in the fossil record. So they went out enthusiastic to prove Darwin right. Problem was Darwin was wrong, so the proof wasn't there. So they didn't find the missing links they were looking for. What they did find is a lot of old dragon bones. What they really proved is, no, dummies. Dragons weren't a legend. Look, here's their bones all over the place. But see, they didn't care about whether dragons existed or not. They wanted to prove evolution. So these are the kind of guys who give them lemons, they make lemonade. So they got all these old dragon bones. How can they turn dragon bones into a proof for evolution? Well, first of all, you give them a new name. You don't call them dragons anymore. You call them dinosaurs. What does dinosaur mean? A terrible lizard. What do you think a dragon was but a terrible lizard? So they give them a new name. Then, of course, they deny what everybody remembers, that they breathe fire. Of course they didn't breathe fire. How do you tell from bones whether a creature breathed fire? You know, the Tyrannosaurus Rex had a head the size of a Volkswagen and a brain the size of a walnut. What do you think it had in that head? Maybe a giant fire-breathing apparatus? But at any rate, of course they didn't breathe fire. We know, just because that's ridiculous, right? A creature couldn't breathe fire. Bombardier beetles can't exist. A creature couldn't breathe fire, so, of course, nobody said all the dragons breathe fire. There was one kind. But these didn't breathe fire. A dragon is a mythological giant lizard that breathed fire. A dinosaur is a real lizard that didn't breathe, a giant lizard that didn't breathe fire. And then, of course, they came up with a lie. Maybe these lived millions of years ago. Well, no, people were writing about them and knew about them a couple thousand years ago, maybe a couple hundred years ago. I mean, Beowulf was, something like 1,000 years ago. He was fighting a dragon or something. But maybe they lived millions of years ago and went extinct. And so what do? But they use dragons/dinosaurs to brainwash children from the time they are in kindergarten or before to believe in evolution and to deny God. Well, that's what they did with this possibly greatest of all God's land creatures, his dinosaur creation. But I believe that the behemoth was the largest of the dinosaurs. It was herbivorous, he says. It eats grass like the ox. Verse 16. Behold, his massive strength is in his loins. His force doth in his belly's muscles lie. So this dinosaur was incredibly strong. Well, he would have to be. He was the largest land animal God made. He would dwarf our largest land animal now, our elephants and hippopotamuses he'd eat for lunch. So, not literally, he was herbivorous, but he would dwarf our largest animals now. And of course, he's living on land. He's not like the blue whale that can live in the water. He's living on land. He has to lift his huge bulk. So he's incredibly strong, he says. Verse 17, shakes he his tail? 'Tis like a cedar tree. The sinews of his thighs are firm and twined. Now this is why I say it's utterly ridiculous to say this is either a hippopotamus or an elephant. Have you seen their tails? Would you describe them more like a cedar tree? More like a rope. Or a snake back there. A cedar tree? That's pathetic. That's not a cedar tree. Of course this isn't a hippopotamus or an elephant. No, this is one of those big giant dinosaurs with those big tails that they had. You can knock down trees with that tail. Just like a cedar tree, the sinews of his thighs are firm and twined. His bones are strong, like unto tubes of brass. His ribs with bars of iron may compare. So the strength of his bones, he says, is like metal. Well, it would have to be to hold this giant creature together. You have to have incredibly strong bones. And just imagine the frame he'd have to withstand gravity for a creature his size. So he describes his bones like tubes of brass and ribs like bars of iron. Well, they'd have to be for a creature that large. Verse 19, a masterpiece of all God's ways is he. Only his maker can bring nigh his sword. So Bullinger translates this, a masterpiece of all God's ways. The King James says he is the chief of the ways of God. This means the first. The first. And I think in this context it means the largest. Of everything God made, he is the largest, the biggest of all God's creatures. Now it's said today that the largest mammal is the blue whale. But see, that's today. That's now that Behemoth is extinct. But he was the largest of all. Or maybe, at least he means he's the largest of all land-going creatures. The biggest one. The absolute biggest one. And like I say, I think he dwarfed the elephant or the hippopotamus. So he says, only his maker can bring nigh his sword. Now, there are native peoples who hunt elephants and who hunt hippopotamuses. But they're small compared to this creature. It says, who could attack this creature with a sword? Those natives who attack elephants and hippopotami, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it, only his maker. Only his maker. But natives hunt elephants and hippopotamuses. Is the Lord badly exaggerating here? Is he overstating his case? No, this behemoth was a giant dinosaur, not a hippo or an elephant. Verse 20, the mountains will bring produce forth for him, while all the beasts do fearless round him play. So he feeds on the mountains. Now imagine the amount of food a creature that size would have to eat. So he probably spent all his time eating as an herbivorous animal, all his time grazing. Now it reads, while he eats, all the other animals play around him fearlessly. He isn't a fierce creature. He's herbivorous. I suppose their only danger is getting stepped on. Of course, that would be a danger with a creature that large. But other than that, they play around him fearless because he's busy eating. He's not going to bother them as long as they don't attack him. Verse 21, beneath the shady trees he lieth down, and rests in covert of the reed and fen. So he lies beneath the shady trees. And Bullinger says that this translates into a kind of lotus, so to Strong's, of the lotus tree. And then he rests in the covert and the shelter of the reed and fen. Now this would indicate the swamp, the reedy swamp, the wetlands. So this creature likes the brook. He likes the wet places. He likes the swamps. Verse 22, the shady trees weave o'er him each its shade, while willows of the brook encompass him. So shady trees are again the lotus. So he likes to shade shelter under the lotus, this dinosaur or dragon does. Probably only when lying down. I don't think any tree could give him much shadow when he's standing. He's as tall as they were. But when he's lying down, they give him a shade. And the willows of the brook encompass or surround him. He likes, again, wet places, the brook. Verse 23, suppose the stream should swell. He will not blench, for he believes that Jordan he can drink. So the stream might swell. It might mean that he lies down in a river and blocks it up. He basically is so large he dammed the river. But is he threatened by the flooding? No, he's so large it doesn't matter to him. He doesn't care if the river is going everywhere because he lay down in it. He's large enough it doesn't matter to him. He thinks he could just open his mouth and start drinking down the Jordan River if he wanted to. He's so large. Again, this must be some creature. Ask yourself, does this really fit the elephant or the hippo? No. No, they can't drink a river. They don't block up the river just by lying down in it and yet not be bothered by that. They don't have tails like a cedar tree. This is a dinosaur, a dragon. Verse 24, shall any take him while he lies on watch? Or with a hook shall any pierce his nose? So, though he's generally peaceful, he asks, would anyone want to attack him while he's awake? Oh, absolutely not. Attack this creature with a tail like a tree? One that dwarfs all other creatures? Attack him? Bones like metal? No one could subdue him. No one could control him. Put a hook in his nose means take him captive. No one could do it. So once again, I believe if this is a description of any large animal today, I don't care which one you list, elephant, hippo, or whatever, it's a gross exaggeration if it's of any living creature. Or at least of any that we know of. But I believe that what this is a description of is of the largest of the dinosaurs. The biggest of all the creatures, at least of all the land creatures God made. Now we don't know of any that are alive. But this behemoth, who made him? Who made this magnificent creature? Yehovah. And that's his point. He made this biggest of all creatures. But now he moves on to the fiercest of all creatures. Chapter 41, verse 1. Canst thou draw up Leviathan with hook? Or catch, as with an angler's line, his tongue? So he mentions Leviathan. Now the suggestion of some, including Bullinger, sadly, in his companion Bible, because of his acceptance of the evolutionary ages, is that this is a crocodile. But I suggest that that is utterly ridiculous considering the description. God would be way, way, way overselling this creature if it's the crocodile, and that would destroy his very point. He says no one would dare battle a Leviathan. Yet, some years ago, there was a TV series where a man, granted, probably kind of a foolish man, but a man went on this TV series wrestle crocodiles. He was called the Crocodile Hunter. And he never died doing it. He'd get into the water and wrestle the things. And God talks about, oh, no one would dare fight this guy. And this idiot runs out and wrestles crocodiles. And I'm supposed to believe a crocodile is a Leviathan? Give me a break. Give me a break. Of course this isn't a crocodile. It's ludicrous to think of a Leviathan as a crocodile. Now, Leviathan has already been mentioned in Job 3 and verse 8. Though it was translated, let them curse it that curse today who are ready to raise up a Leviathan, a dragon. Anybody who accidentally stirred up a Leviathan, disturbed him in his lair or something, would curse that day. Well, you better believe it. If you stirred up the fiercest of the dinosaur/dragons, you'd curse the day you did it. So again, I believe if Behemoth was the largest dinosaur/dragon, I believe Leviathan was the fiercest, from the way he describes him. And he appears to be the fire-breathing variety that's caught everybody's imagination in legend, and the people still remember. Again, the Bombardier beetle has a mechanism that shoots fire. Why not a lizard? And if a lizard, why not a giant one? So I think this was the fire-breathing variety. Behemoth was not. Of course, crocodiles and alligators are not. But this was the fire-breathing variety. Now, Leviathan is also mentioned in the Psalm, Psalm 74:14. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathans in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. So this incredible creature that no human being would dare attack, the Lord attacks and breaks his heads. In Psalm 104:26, it mentions the sea, there go the ships, there is that Leviathan whom thou hast made to play therein. So he's mentioned as being an aquatic creature, playing in the sea. And then in Isaiah chapter 27 and verse 1, is the last place it mentions Leviathan. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea, but that really means the river, the Nile River. And it seems that there were dinosaurs living along the Nile, and so Egypt, one of their symbols was the dinosaur. So he says, could you hook Leviathan like you'd hook a fish? Could you catch his tongue with an angler's line? His fiercest of all dinosaurs? Dragons? Could you catch him with a fish hook? Well, of course, that's ludicrous. Verse 2, canst thou insert into his nose a reed? Or canst thou pierce his jaw through with a thorn? Of course not. He's far too fearsome for anyone to do this with him. Far too fearsome for anyone to insert a reed in his nose or pierce his jaw with a thorn. Verse 3, will he make many humble prayers to thee? Or will he ever say soft things to thee? Will he be kind and soft and sweet to you? This fiercest of all monsters? No, of course not. Verse 4, will he engage in covenant with thee, that thou shouldst take him for thy lifelong slave? We would say, could he be domesticated? Would he, and the Hebrew phrase is cut a covenant with you. In Hebrew, they'd always cut a covenant because you'd have a covenant sacrifice you'd cut in half, and then the people entering the covenant would pass between the pieces. So would Leviathan ever cut a covenant with you? That he would become your slave forever? Olam is the Hebrew word for the outflow from then on. He's your pet? Of course not. Verse 5, wilt thou, as with some linnet, play with him? Or wilt thou cage him for thy maiden sport? So could you play with him like you play with a bird? Of course, the silly evolutionists have suggested that dinosaurs turned into birds. Oh boy. But could you play with a dinosaur like you could play with a bird? Or would you put him in a cage for your little girls to play with? Imagine this most fearsome monster in a cage for little girls to play with. No, that's silly. Imagine putting a Leviathan in a cage. But here's the thing, people have put crocodiles in cages, haven't they? You can put a crocodile in a cage. You wouldn't want to do that with a Leviathan, I'll tell you what. Will trading dealers haggle o'er his price and retail him among the merchantmen? So, could you offer Leviathan up for sale? Could you capture one and say, here's a nice Leviathan for sale? Could the dealers sell him? Could they haggle over his price? No one could deal in Leviathan. This most fearsome of all monsters. No one could capture him. He can't be traded for. Verse 7, wilt thou with darts essay to fill his skin, or pierce his head with spears for catching fish? So, this tells us no one can spear him. Your spears are useless against him. Now, are spears useless against a crocodile? No, people have hunted crocodile with spears. It's dangerous, but they've done it. But this is no crocodile. And spears are useless. You can't pierce his head with a spear. Verse 8, lay thou thy hand upon him, though but once. Think only of the contest, do no more. So would you dare to put a hand on Leviathan? You said if you did, you'd do it one time. Why one time? Well, because he'd be dead. It's like when I was training to work with powerful lasers. And they told us in the training class, you can accidentally shine a laser in your eyes twice. I thought about that and I thought, you know what? I don't want to work with lasers. Why twice? Well, because you got two eyes. Once they're both burned out, it doesn't matter if you shine a laser in them. So you can accidentally shine a laser in your eyes twice. Well, you can go up and touch Leviathan once. And you'll never do it again. But think about what you're in for, and you're not going to do it. Now tell Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, that. Boy, if you touch a crocodile, you'll never do it again. Is God exaggerating ridiculously here? Or is he not talking about the crocodile at all? He is not talking about the crocodile. He is talking about the fiercest of all dinosaurs. Verse 9, behold, all hope of taking him is vain. Even at the sight of him one is cast down. So all hope of capturing a Leviathan is pointless. You'll never do it. You'll never do it. Just to catch a glimpse of him is to be defeated. Crocodiles, huh? Crocodiles. Watch The Crocodile Hunter once. See if that's how you describe a crocodile. Verse 10, none so foolhardy as to stir him up. Before me, then, his maker who can stand. So don't tell Steve Irwin nobody's foolhardy enough to stir up a crocodile. See, the Lord's point falls completely flat if this is a crocodile. That's silly. That's silly. This is not a crocodile. This is a dinosaur, the fiercest of all dinosaurs. So he says, if nobody would be foolhardy enough to stir up the Leviathan, who can stand before the one who made Leviathan? Think about it. No one would dare to stand up to Leviathan. But Job is thinking, I can stand up to the one who made Leviathan. Now this point, and it's an incredible point based off an incredible creature, and yet those very creatures have been corrupted by the enemies of God to convince people that they don't need a God, everything made itself. Pathetic. Verse 11, whoever first gave to me that I should him repay, since all beneath the heavens is mine. So Yehovah says, whoever gave to me first, that I need to pay him back. Of course, no one gave the maker of everything first. He made it all. Nothing would exist if it weren't for him. So he doesn't owe anyone. He doesn't have to pay anyone back. Everything beneath the heavens, everything in creation is his. And this is the one Job thinks he can argue with and win. So in this portion, Yehovah asks Job if he can judge like God judges. If he can send forth his power like God can send forth his power. And of course he can't. Then he brings forth as evidence of his greatness the two most spectacular land animals he created. The Behemoth, the largest one, the largest of the dinosaurs, and Leviathan, the most terrible, the fiercest of the dinosaurs. He says if no one can stand before these monsters, no one can capture them, no one has the strength to take them on, who has the strength to take on their maker? Who has the strength to take on the one who created them? Clearly no one. So how did Job think he could argue with God and condemn him? Obviously he can't. Well, this is a good lesson for us to learn. And of course, there's plenty of so-called atheists and agnostics who think they can argue with the creator of these creatures. And of course, they twist these creatures to deny God. But I'll tell you what, you can't argue with the one who made Behemoth and Leviathan. Well, that is the Lord's second part of his second address. Then his third appeal, we'll see. He goes back to Leviathan and makes a third appeal. And then we'll get to the finale and the conclusion of the book of Job. We'll do that next time. Thanks for watching. If you'd enjoyed this, please press like below. And until we meet again around the pages of God's book, I bid you goodbye.